Pick one of the boys, Richard said, sliding the divorce papers toward me. After 10 years of raising all three as my sons, he expected me to choose between them and leave almost everything else behind. Instead, I took Lily's hand. None. His mother laughed. Then I placed 3 sealed DNA reports beside the divorce papers. The laughter stopped. What did Richard know that I had only just discovered? Richard slid the blue folder across the glass coffee table and told me our marriage was over. He said the papers were already prepared. If I wanted things handled quietly, I was supposed to leave the Whitmore house with almost nothing and choose either Noah or Caleb to take with me. Ethan would stay. Richard said the oldest boy had obligations to the family. The agreement called my departure voluntary. It asked me to give up most claims against the family and keep quiet about private matters. Even Lily's support was treated like another number someone had decided without asking me. I stared at him. 10 years of marriage had been reduced to a folder and a choice between children. Margaret sat near the fireplace with her hands folded in her lap. She told me this arrangement was generous and said I should think about stability instead of pride. Powerful families rarely call control what it is. They call it stability, tradition, doing what is best for everyone. Richard leaned back and asked which boy I wanted. For 1 second, I could not answer. I remembered Ethan burning with fever, asleep against my shoulder while I sat awake until sunrise. I remembered Noah curled against me during an asthma attack while I counted every breath. I remembered Caleb refusing to sleep unless his small hand was wrapped around one of my fingers. None of that had been fake to me. Then Lily stepped closer and quietly hooked her finger around mine. That small touch settled something inside me. None. Margaret laughed first. Richard stared at me as if I had misunderstood the question. I reached into my bag and placed 3 envelopes on the table. The room went still. Because none of those boys is biologically mine. The smile left Richard's face. Margaret said the tests had to be wrong. I did not argue with her. I told them they were private DNA tests, not a final court determination. My attorney was already prepared to request independent confirmation if Richard wanted to challenge them. Then I said the one thing I had never been able to say to him before. If they are wrong, prove it. I looked toward Vanessa. She did not speak. Richard looked at her before he looked back at me. That was all I needed to see. What I remember most is not Margaret's laughter. It is the clock on the mantel. It kept ticking as if a man asking his wife to choose between children was an ordinary thing. But those 3 envelopes had not appeared in my life overnight. To understand why I had them ready before Richard ever showed me divorce papers, I have to go back years earlier to a hospital room, the child I lost, and a fertility clinic I trusted with the part of my life I was most afraid to lose. That hospital room was where the lie really began. Years earlier, when I was trying to become the kind of wife the Whitmore family approved of, I was pregnant with my first child. Margaret never shouted at me. She made every request sound like a test. The family is counting on you. You don't want people thinking you can manage this. I heard those sentences often enough that I started repeating them to myself. So when the family foundation held its charity dinner, I kept working even though I was exhausted. I checked place cards, reviewed donor lists, answered the caterer, and stood through conversations that seemed endless. By late afternoon, a dull pain had started low in my stomach. I told myself it was stress. Then it got worse. The hospital hallway smelled like disinfectant and coffee. I remember shoes outside my room, discharge papers on a chair, and the plastic hospital bracelet around my wrist. I could not make myself take it off. We lost the baby. Richard stayed beside me for a few hours. He held my hand. He looked hurt. Then, before I understood what had happened, he started talking about what came next. Margaret visited the following morning. She adjusted my blanket and said, "You should focus on recovering. There will be other options, No one said, "I'm sorry." That hurt more than anger would have. Months later, Richard took me to Harborview Fertility Center. The doctor explained that another pregnancy could carry serious risks. One option was to create embryos using my eggs and Richard's sperm, then transfer them to a gestational carrier. I wanted to believe there was still a path back to the life I thought we were building. There were forms everywhere, consent pages, medical releases, financial documents. Richard touched my shoulder. "Let me handle the paperwork. You've been through enough." At the time, it sounded like love. Years later, those words would sound very different. I used to think people only lost control when someone took it from them. Later, I learned that sometimes we hand it over because we are too hurt to keep carrying it. I had lost a child. Trusting my husband did not feel like weakness. Back then, it felt like marriage. Months later, Richard told me the process had worked. When Ethan was born through a gestational carrier, I held him against my chest and cried. Richard looked at us and said, "He's ours." I believed him. 2 years later, Noah came. Then Caleb. I never questioned whether the boys I stayed awake caring for carried my DNA. Not until a doctor looked at Ethan's blood records, then looked at me a little too long. The doctor did not tell me anything dramatic. Ethan had cut his hand badly enough to need stitches after falling against a broken picture frame. While we waited, the doctor asked about family history and blood type information. I gave him what I knew. He looked at the chart, then at me. "You may want to verify the old records." That was all. When I asked Richard about it that night, his face tightened. "Are you really doing this?" I apologized before I knew why, but something had shifted. When you live with someone long enough, you do not always discover a lie because of one enormous piece of evidence. Sometimes the small details simply stop fitting together. Months later, Noah was hospitalized after a bad asthma attack. An older nurse walked into the room, saw Vanessa near the window, and said, "Mom." She stopped. "I'm sorry, I confused the chart." Vanessa looked away. I told myself it meant nothing. Then one evening, while helping Caleb into his pajamas, I noticed a small birthmark near his shoulder. I had seen one almost identical on Vanessa. Again, it proved nothing. But by then, I had stopped dismissing every uncomfortable thought just because accepting it would hurt. The moment that finally changed me came from Lily. She had been coloring in the hallway while Margaret spoke quietly with Vanessa nearby. Later, Lily asked why Grandma talked about the boys as if they belonged to Vanessa. She had heard Margaret say, "The boys are protected, that's what matters." I stared at my daughter and realized the adults were no longer the only ones noticing the cracks. I did not confront Richard. I did not search his phone. I kept medical records I already had access to, spoke privately with Daniel, and arranged preliminary testing using personal samples collected through ordinary family routines. I checked more than once because I did not want suspicion to become accusation before I knew the truth. I was not collecting evidence for revenge. I needed to know what I was protecting Lily from. The first results showed no maternal relationship to Ethan. I tested Noah, then Caleb. All 3 results said the same thing. I sealed them in 3 envelopes. I still did not know who had replaced my DNA in the Harborview records. But I knew confronting Richard that night would only tell him how much I had discovered. So I put the envelopes away, made dinner as usual, and waited for his next mistake. For the next several days, I did exactly what I had always done. I drove Noah to his follow-up appointment. I packed Ethan's lunch before school. I read the same picture book to Caleb twice because he asked me to. I walked Lily to class and stood through family dinners as if nothing inside me had changed. But everything had changed. For the first time, I was not simply serving the room. I was watching it. I noticed how Richard and Vanessa spoke without finishing their sentences, how she already knew which coffee he wanted, how Margaret never treated Vanessa like someone who worked for the family. She treated her like someone who belonged there. The boys were not cruel. That mattered to me. The imbalance came from the adults. Margaret asked Ethan which summer program interested him most. She told Noah that one day he would understand the business. Caleb received another expensive toy because he had been such a good boy. When Lily tried to join those conversations, Margaret would smile and say, "Lily has a different future." One evening at dinner, Margaret asked Ethan what he thought about a new Whitmore development project. Lily brightened beside me. "My painting got hung at school today." Margaret barely turned. "Sweetheart, let Ethan finish." Lily closed her mouth. She never told the rest of the story. I looked at my daughter and saw something that frightened me more than the DNA results. She was learning to wait for everyone else before deciding whether her own voice mattered. I had done the same thing for years. I used to think children did not notice power inside a family. They do not need the word for it. They notice who speaks first, who waits, who gets forgiven, and who is always expected to understand. That was when my question changed. I no longer wanted only to know what Richard had done. I had to decide what kind of woman I was teaching Lily to become. A few days later, I met Daniel privately. He told me not to sign anything, not to threaten Richard, and to keep the original records somewhere safe. Any DNA issue, he said, needed to move through the proper process. He also warned me that money could become Richard's next weapon. Then he asked, "Does he know you know?" "No." Daniel nodded. "Keep it that way until you're ready." That night, Richard came home late. He loosened his tie, looked at me, and said, "We need to talk tomorrow. Mom will be there." The 3 DNA reports were already in my bag. I just did not know Richard had prepared a blue folder of his own. Margaret was the first to reject the DNA results. She said private tests proved nothing and accused me of trying to embarrass the family. Richard was quieter. He kept staring at the envelopes, then at me. Finally, he asked what I wanted. "Money? The house? Is that what this is?" Daniel's warning came back to me. Do not sign anything. Do not negotiate under pressure. So I kept my voice steady. "I want a divorce handled legally, and Lily leaves with me tonight." Richard started to argue, but Ethan spoke first. "Are you leaving us?" That question nearly broke me. I looked at the boy I had taken to school, tucked into bed, and sat beside through fevers. Noah stood behind him, silent. Caleb was too young to understand why every adult in the room suddenly looked different. "What happened between the adults isn't your fault," I said. Caleb's collar was folded under his sweater. Without thinking, I bent down and fixed it. My hands still knew how to be his mother, even when everything else had changed. Then I forced myself to stand. Vanessa had barely spoken. She looked pale, but composed. I met her eyes. "Whatever you and Richard decided years ago, those boys deserved the truth before I did." For the first time, she had no answer. I went upstairs with Lily and packed only what we needed: clothes, her school and medical records, my laptop, personal documents, copies of papers I had a right to keep. At the bottom of a closet, I found my old box of paints. I took that too. I left the jewelry, silver, artwork, and everything that belonged to the house. The suitcase wheels clicked across the stone entryway. Then the heavy front door closed behind us. I had always imagined leaving a marriage would be loud. Maybe the real moment is quieter. Maybe it is simply deciding you will not go back inside for another coat. In the taxi, Lily leaned against me. "Are we going back tomorrow?" No. After a while, she asked, "Will Grandma be mad?" I kissed her hair. Grandma can feel however she needs to feel. My job is to make sure you feel safe. The apartment in Dorchester was small and old. Lily looked at one empty wall. "Can I put my drawings there?" "Every wall you want." That night, she fell asleep quickly. I did not. My laptop showed 3 missed calls from Richard and 1 message from Margaret. "The boys need you. Come home before you make this worse." I looked at Lily sleeping. They still had not realized that I no longer considered their house my home. A few days later, the apartment had begun to feel less like a place we had escaped to and more like a place we actually lived. There was a box of crayons on the floor, 2 mismatched mugs beside the sink, and my old easel near the window. Lily had chosen yellow for one wall of her drawings. I let her. I reopened my portfolio and accepted a small illustration job. The pay was modest, but when the first deposit arrived, I stared at the number. It was money I had earned with something I once believed I had lost. That afternoon, someone knocked. Margaret and Vanessa were outside. Margaret looked past me at the narrow hallway and worn floors. "This isn't sustainable, Claire." I did not invite them farther inside. Margaret explained that Ethan had become angry. Noah had suffered another asthma episode, and Caleb refused to settle at night. Vanessa was helping with Margaret's appointments and could not manage everything. Then Margaret softened her voice. "Whatever happened between you and Richard, the boys shouldn't suffer for it." Half of that was true. "The boys should not suffer." Margaret suggested I return to the guest suite. "For the children." "Which children?" She paused. I looked back at Lily, sitting on the floor with a green crayon. Neither woman had asked how she was sleeping. Neither had asked whether she was afraid. They had not come looking for a mother they missed. They had come looking for the woman who had kept their house running. Vanessa said, "Caleb keeps asking for you." The words hurt exactly where she meant them to, but I stayed where I was. "Then you and Richard need to start telling those boys the truth, instead of sending me back inside the lie." Before, all Margaret had to say was that the family needed me. Now I had another question. What did Lily need? There is a difference between being needed and being loved. It took me almost a decade to understand that I had often been valued most when I was doing something for everyone else. After they left, I called Daniel. He told me not to let anyone in, uninvited, to document every visit, keep communication about Lily in writing, route settlement offers through him, and stay off social media. The next morning, someone sent me an article. The headline suggested that a wealthy executive's wife had abandoned 3 sons after her marriage collapsed. Then a client emailed, "We may need to pause the project until this settles." I looked at the screen. Lily sat on the floor coloring a yellow house. Richard could not make me come back, so he had chosen the next thing he thought I needed to survive: my reputation. The first article was bad enough. By evening, there were 3 more. They all used the same language. They called me a freelance artist, said I had abandoned 3 boys, and painted me as a bitter wife punishing a husband. None mentioned the DNA results. I wanted to answer every word. Daniel stopped me. "Don't give them an emotional quote they can use against you." So I stayed quiet. I saved screenshots, publication times, links, and the email from the client who had paused my work. A few days later, I picked Lily up from school. Another mother saw me at the gate and turned away. That evening, Lily asked, "Mom, did you really leave my brothers because you didn't love them?" Someone had been talking near the school. "No," I said. "I left because adults were making choices that weren't safe or honest. Your brothers did nothing wrong." She looked down. "Then why does everybody say you did?" That question hurt more than the articles. Adults like to think a smear campaign only reaches the person it targets. Children carry it into classrooms, dinner tables, and the questions they ask before sleep. I understood then that Richard was not only trying to embarrass me, he wanted to exhaust me until going back felt easier than standing alone. Days later, I left a work meeting and found several missed calls from Lily's school. Richard was still listed as her legal father, and we had no temporary custody order yet. He had emailed the school saying his mother would pick Lily up. Margaret had shown identification. The school let her leave with my daughter. I called Richard. "Where is Lily?" "She's with Mom." Stop turning everything into a crisis. My fear went cold. "Bring her back." He started to say my name. I cut him off. "You wanted a private divorce fight. The moment you used Lily to scare me, you changed what this is." Daniel was already involved. I told Richard the school would file an incident report and the pickup would become part of the custody record. Less than an hour later, the family car returned. Lily ran into my arms. "Grandma said if I kept making trouble, maybe you wouldn't be allowed to keep me." Some words leave no bruises. They simply teach a child to wonder whether another adult can take away a mother's love. That was the moment my fight changed. The next morning, Daniel placed 4 folders in front of me. "From now on, Claire, we're going to make sure nobody gets to rewrite what happened yesterday." Lily slept beside me that night because she was afraid Margaret might come back. I barely slept at all. The next morning, Daniel spread 4 folders across his desk. One held the school incident report. Another held Richard's email authorizing Margaret to pick Lily up. The others contained messages, camera clips from my apartment building, the articles about me, and emails from clients who had stepped away. He wanted everything dated and organized. Money can buy Richard more lawyers. It can't erase a documented pattern. Daniel filed requests for temporary protections around Lily. He wanted her living arrangement clearly defined, school pickup limited to approved adults, communication kept in writing, and Margaret prevented from appearing whenever she pleased. He also wanted both sides to stop using Lily as a messenger. For the first time, I understood that being believed was not the same as being protected. Protection needed records. A few days later, I took Lily to a therapist Daniel had recommended. The therapist gave her paper and crayons. Lily drew the Whitmore house first. It was enormous. Ethan, Noah, and Caleb were inside. She drew herself outside. There were no windows. The therapist did not interpret the picture for me. She simply asked, "Where is Mom?" Lily picked up a gray crayon and drew me beside her under an umbrella. I had to look away. I used to think children remembered the big things: birthdays, Christmas mornings, vacations. Lily remembered who was called to dinner first, who could interrupt without being corrected, who was expected to wait, smile, and make the room easier for everyone else. I had left when I finally understood what was happening, but sitting there, I wondered if I had left later than I should have. That afternoon, Daniel told me the private DNA results gave him enough reason to pursue independent confirmation through the proper process. Then he mentioned another name, Rebecca Whitmore. She was related to Richard and had once worked as a controller for Whitmore Development Group. Rebecca had contacted Daniel herself. Her message was simple. If Claire really has questions about Harborview, she should also be asking what Richard was paying for through the family foundation. Until that moment, I had treated the children and the money as separate secrets. They were not. I walked into my meeting with Rebecca, expecting a few questionable invoices. What she placed on the table showed me something much larger. Richard had not only lied inside our marriage, he had built a system where people were paid not to ask the wrong questions. Rebecca did not waste time. She opened a folder and started with invoices I recognized. Years earlier, Richard had asked me to scan charity binders, donor packets, and vendor paperwork for the family foundation. I had seen some names before, but I had never understood what they meant. Rebecca did. She showed me inflated vendor bills, payments to a consulting company with no real staff, foundation expenses that did not match the events they covered, and transfers connected to Vanessa or people close to her. I stared at one invoice. I remember this one. Rebecca nodded. You saw pieces. I saw the ledger. She had once refused to approve a document she believed was false. Not long after that, she was pushed out. She stayed quiet because she feared losing her pension, being cut off by the family, and causing trouble for her children. Then she said something I carried with me afterward. I spent years telling myself silence kept my family safe. Mostly, it kept powerful people comfortable. I understood her more than I wanted to. There is a kind of power that never has to order anyone to stay quiet. It only has to make each person believe that if they speak, they will be the only one who pays for it. Daniel was also following the Harbor View records. That was how he found Helen Carter, a retired nurse who had worked there during the years my sons were conceived. Helen remembered my name. She remembered an embryo code that did not match the chart. She remembered a consent page being replaced, and she remembered Vanessa's name appearing in laboratory records where it did not make sense. She was careful. I knew something was wrong. I didn't know how much. Helen had kept a few personal notes and could identify inconsistencies in records Daniel obtained through proper channels. Then her voice softened. I was afraid of losing my job. I told myself somebody above me would fix it. She paused. Nobody did. Helen agreed to give a statement about what she had personally seen. Rebecca turned her documents over through counsel. Daniel looked at me. You do not contact Richard about any of this. That night, a message came from a number I did not recognize. It was Noah. Mom, Ethan knows. I stopped at that one word. Mom. I had prepared myself to face Richard, Margaret, and Vanessa. I had never prepared myself to explain to an 11-year-old boy that the woman he had called his mother all his life was not the woman who gave birth to him. Ethan came to the apartment the next afternoon with Noah and the family driver waiting downstairs. The moment I opened the door, I knew he was angry. He did not hug me. He did not even take off his jacket. Were we just somebody else's kids to you? The question landed harder than anything Richard had said. I wanted to defend myself. I wanted to tell him every detail, every lie, every decision adults had made before he was old enough to understand any of it. Instead, I told him the part that mattered most. Every fever mattered. Every birthday mattered. Every night I sat beside your bed mattered. Ethan looked at me. Then why did you leave? I took a breath. Because loving you didn't give the adults the right to use you to control me or hurt Lily. His eyes moved toward the drawings taped along the wall. Lily was sitting at the table, listening without pretending not to. Ethan stared at one picture for a long moment. Grandma said the boys were supposed to matter more. Lily looked at him. I know. Nothing else was said. That was enough. Noah had been quiet the whole time. Finally, he asked the question I had been afraid of. Is Vanessa really our mom? I sat beside him. The tests say she may be your biological mother. Testing confirmed through the court process will answer that properly. Then I added, but none of this is because of something you did. Noah nodded, but his face crumpled for a second. Caleb still asks for you before bed. That hurt more than I expected. DNA could tell me who gave birth to a child. It could not count the nights I had stayed awake beside him, the medicine I had measured, or the stories I had read when no one else had the patience. Adults like to say, children will understand when they are older. Sometimes that is just a polite way of admitting We have handed them a truth too heavy for their age and hoped time will carry it for us. When Ethan finally stood to leave, he looked less angry and more tired. He still did not apologize. I did not ask him to. Before he reached the door, he stopped. Dad and Vanessa were screaming last night. Dad told her if anybody asks, the company stuff was all hers. Then he left. I stood there with my hand on the doorknob. Richard was no longer only hiding the truth. He was choosing who would carry the blame for it. The next few days did not bring some dramatic collapse of Whitmore development. Instead, pressure arrived in quieter ways. Auditors requested records. Several board members pushed for a special review. Business partners delayed decisions they had once approved without hesitation. The family foundation was also being examined. Daniel told me Richard had met with Vanessa and her attorney after questions surfaced about the consulting company tied to her name. Richard's position was simple. If anyone asked, Vanessa was supposed to say the shell company had been her private operation. That was when she understood what he was doing. He was preparing to leave her holding the entire mess. Vanessa did not suddenly become honest because her conscience woke up. She became cooperative because protecting Richard was no longer protecting herself. Through her own lawyer, she disclosed a box of records she had kept for years. It contained copies of fertility documents, original company papers, recordings, correspondence, and records connected to the public relations campaign against me. She had kept them as insurance. Now they were her way out. Daniel asked whether I wanted to send a message. I gave him one sentence. If you care about those boys at all, stop protecting the lie. Nothing more. No promises. No deals. No pretending I had the power to excuse what she had done. Then Richard turned on the person who had protected him longest. During a meeting about the family foundation, Daniel later told me, Richard said, "My mother chaired the foundation. Those approvals were under her office." Margaret stared at him. "Richard, what are you saying?" He would not meet her eyes. There are families that call loyalty a virtue until someone has to carry the consequences. Then loyalty can start to look a lot like an agreement that only lasts while it is useful. I did not break the Whitmore family. I simply stopped standing in the same place and covering the cracks. That evening, Daniel updated me. The independent DNA process supported the private results. Helen was prepared to testify about what she had personally witnessed. Rebecca's records were organized. The school incident and evidence of the smear campaign would be presented at the temporary custody hearing. Richard's answer was predictable. His lawyers described my income as unstable, my apartment as too small, my behavior as emotional, and my departure as proof that I had abandoned 3 sons. Daniel closed the file. Tomorrow, Richard is going to try to make the size of his house more important than what happened inside it. I looked at Lily's drawing on the wall. Then we'll show them what happened inside it. The hearing was quieter than I expected. Richard's lawyers focused on my small apartment, my freelance income, how quickly I had left, and the 3 boys I had raised. Daniel did not argue about who was better. He showed a pattern. The school pickup report, Richard's written authorization, our messages, Lily's therapist notes, the smear campaign records, camera documentation, the independent DNA confirmation, Helen's account of Harborview irregularities, Rebecca's financial records. Richard finally said, "I can give Lily everything Claire can't." When I was asked about our home, I answered simply, Richard can give her a larger house. I'm asking the court to consider where she is less afraid. The temporary order kept Lily with me and restricted Margaret from taking her without authorization. Communication remained in writing. Soon after, the foundation board asked Margaret to step aside. She lost control slowly. Vanessa turned over records through her lawyer. The financial issues moved into separate investigations. Months later, Daniel called. Investigators had stopped Richard while he was trying to move assets and leave Boston. Vanessa was also facing consequences, while Harborview and the shell companies were handled by the proper authorities. I was not there. I did not need to be. I once thought victory would feel like watching the people who hurt me suffer. When consequences came, I mostly felt tired. Maybe freedom begins when someone else's collapse stops being the center of your life. I stayed in appropriate contact with Ethan, Noah, and Caleb. I sent birthday cards and made sure Noah received what he needed. I could not keep living as their legal mother inside a lie, but I refused to become another adult who punished them for a lie they did not create. A few months later, my illustration work was steadier. Our apartment had fresh paint, a studio corner, and 2 geraniums by the window. Lily made a picture called "The House with Open Windows." Our little home was filled with yellow light. Far behind it stood a huge house with no windows. I asked, "Why are our windows open?" "So we can breathe." For years, they mistook my silence for weakness. I learned that silence becomes surrender only when you keep letting other people decide for you. Sometimes, silence is where courage begins, while you gather the truth, protect the people you love, and prepare to walk away. Richard once told me to choose one of 3 sons. The real choice was whether I would keep living inside a lie. What about you? Are you satisfied with Claire's ending? If you were in my place, would you have left with Lily that night, or stayed because of the 3 boys you loved and raised?